The morning did not announce itself as important. It arrived quietly, carried on pale sunlight and the low hum of a city waking up to itself. Storefronts unlocked their doors. Cars slid into traffic. People stepped into the day with coffee cups, headphones, and half-formed thoughts about what awaited them later. Nothing felt unusual. At 9:42 a.m., Lena Morrison walked out of her apartment building and into that ordinary morning. She moved the way people do when their mind is already ahead of their body, thinking about tasks, deadlines, small plans that feel certain simply because they always have been. She wore a light jacket, jeans worn comfortably at the knees, and carried a canvas bag over her shoulder. Her phone rested loosely in her hand. She paused briefly near the entrance, lifting her hand in a small wave toward the security desk. It wasn't a meaningful exchange, just a reflex of politeness, just a moment that would later be slowed down, zoomed in, and replayed by strangers searching for something hidden in plain sight. Then she stepped forward and joined the flow of the sidewalk. Lena had lived in the neighborhood long enough to stop noticing it. She passed the bakery without looking inside, even though the smell of warm bread drifted into the street. She walked past parked cars reflecting the morning sky, past trees that cast thin shadows across the pavement. Her pace was steady, her posture relaxed. Nothing about her movement suggested urgency or concern. If someone had been watching her then, not through a screen but in real life, they would have seen nothing worth remembering. A security camera mounted above a convenience store captured her at 9:44 a.m. The footage was grainy, wide-angled, indifferent. It showed Lena entering the frame from the left, walking forward, glancing briefly at her phone, then looking up again. She didn't stop. She didn't hesitate. She passed through the frame and out the other side, just another figure among hundreds recorded that morning. Later, that footage would be described as unsettling. Not because of what it showed, but because of what it didn't. There was no sign of distress, no sign of anyone nearby paying her unusual attention, no indication that the ordinary rhythm of her morning was about to fracture. A few minutes later, another camera picked her up near Maple Avenue. The intersection was busy in the way weekday mornings often are. Traffic moved in steady waves, pausing and releasing like a breath. A delivery truck idled at the curb. A cyclist slowed near the crosswalk. Two pedestrians crossed in the opposite direction, their reflections stretching across the glass of nearby storefronts. Lena waited at the signal. She shifted her weight slightly and adjusted the strap of her bag. She glanced left, then right. Not with caution, but with habit. Her phone was still in her hand, screen dark now. She looked like someone entirely present in her body, in her routine, in her expectation that the next few minutes would unfold exactly as planned. When the signal changed, she stepped forward. At that precise moment, a bus entered the frame. It was large, white, unremarkable. The kind of bus that blends into the city so completely that no one remembers seeing it 5 minutes later. It moved between Lena and the camera, blocking the view of the crosswalk entirely. For 8 seconds, the camera saw nothing but the side of the bus. 8 seconds. When the bus cleared the frame, the crosswalk came back into view. Lena was gone. The space she should have occupied was empty. No figure appeared on the other side. No movement suggested she had crossed quickly. The sidewalk beyond the intersection showed pedestrians who had not been there moments earlier, walking naturally, unaware that a gap had opened in the story of the morning. Traffic resumed. The light changed again. Life continued. That single stretch of footage would later be watched thousands of times. Slowed down, paused, enhanced. People would argue endlessly about what might have happened during those 8 seconds. Some believed she must have turned back, though no camera ever captured her doing so. Others suggested she crossed early, slipping out of view in a way that defied the angles and timing. A few insisted they saw something hidden, a shadow, a shape, a suggestion of movement just beyond certainty. But the footage itself never changed. It showed a woman stepping forward, a bus passing by, and an absence that refused to explain itself. By late morning, Lena's absence began to ripple outward. She didn't arrive at work. At first, it barely registered. She was reliable, but not rigid. A late start wasn't unheard of. Calls went unanswered, but that too felt explainable. Phones die, meetings run long, mornings drift. By early afternoon, concern settled in quietly. By evening, it had hardened into something heavier. Her phone no longer rang. It went straight to voicemail. Messages remained unread. When someone checked her apartment, they found it locked. Her belongings were where she left them. Nothing appeared disturbed. Her keys were not inside. The bag she had been carrying that morning was gone. It was as if she had stepped out into the day and simply failed to return. As news of her disappearance spread, the city's cameras became witnesses again. Footage was pulled from banks, pharmacies, street corners, and nearby transit routes. Investigators retraced her known path repeatedly, as though walking it again might reveal something memory had missed. But the trail ended where it always did. At Maple Avenue, at the passing bus, at 8 seconds that refused to speak. Friends and co-workers searched their memories for meaning. Small details rose to the surface, fragile and uncertain. A strange message Lena once mentioned but didn't save. A fleeting sense of being watched weeks earlier that she laughed off. Moments that felt harmless at the time, now weighed down with hindsight. Nothing stood out enough to explain what had happened. Nothing answered the question everyone kept asking quietly, then aloud, then everywhere. How does someone vanish in broad daylight, with people nearby, with traffic flowing, with cameras watching? And why did the cameras see everything? Except the truth. By the second day, Lena Morrison was no longer just missing. She was becoming a question. Her photo appeared on screens and flyers, framed by polite words that tried not to admit what everyone was thinking yet. The image showed her smiling gently, the kind of smile that suggested familiarity rather than performance. It was an ordinary photo, taken long before anyone imagined it would be used this way. People studied it closely, as if the answer might be hiding in her expression. Authorities returned to Maple Avenue again, standing where Lena had stood, watching the same traffic pass through the intersection. Buses came and went, pedestrians crossed in loose clusters. The city offered no pause, no acknowledgement that something had fractured here. Cameras were checked again, angles were mapped, timelines tightened, seconds were counted. The bus driver was identified and questioned. He had no memory of anything unusual. His route that morning had been routine, his stops uneventful. The bus itself showed no internal footage that clarified what happened outside its frame. There was no sudden stop, no indication of disturbance. 8 seconds remained unaccounted for. Investigators expanded the search radius, convinced that if Lena had continued walking, she would appear somewhere else. Another camera, another street, another corner of the city's unblinking eye. But she did not. It was as though the moment the bus passed, Lena stepped outside the visible world. At work, her desk remained untouched. A half-finished design file sat open on her computer, frozen in a state of expectation. A coffee mug waited where she had left it the day before. The quiet there felt different now, charged with absence. Friends gathered in hushed conversations, replaying their last interactions with her. They spoke carefully, afraid of assigning meaning where none existed. No arguments, no plans to leave, no visible signs of distress. Lena had talked about the future casually, the way people do when they assume it will arrive without resistance. Online, interest grew quickly. The footage from Maple Avenue spread across forums and comment sections. People from far away, who had never walked those streets, began analyzing the city as though they knew it intimately. They traced possible paths, calculated timing, argued over physics and probability. Some were certain the answer was obvious. Others believed it was unknowable. A few insisted the cameras themselves were unreliable, that something must have happened beyond what they could capture. That technology, for all its presence, still had blind spots, and that thought unsettled people more than any theory. Because cameras are supposed to reassure us. They are meant to make the world feel accounted for, observed, safer simply by existing. Lena's disappearance challenged that comfort. It suggested that even under constant observation, something could still slip through unnoticed. Days passed. Search efforts expanded outward into nearby neighborhoods, transit lines, and public spaces. Posters layered over one another on bulletin boards. Messages poured in from people who thought they had seen someone who looked like her. Each lead raised hope briefly, then dissolved into disappointment. The city learned her name, it learned her routine, it learned the shape of her absence. Yet nothing filled the space she left behind. As attention grew, so did speculation. Some theories leaned toward chance, others toward intention, but none found solid ground. Every idea eventually ran into the same problem. The footage, the calmness of it, the lack of urgency, the normality frozen in those last visible moments. Lena did not appear to be running from anything. She did not look lost. She did not look afraid. That detail became central to the unease surrounding the case. Because if she wasn't reacting to danger, then what had interrupted her path so completely? Friends recalled small details they hadn't mentioned before, hesitant to give weight to memories that felt fragile. Lena had once mentioned feeling uneasy, walking alone at night, though nothing specific ever happened. She had laughed it off, blaming imagination and stress. She was practical, not prone to dramatizing feelings. Those who knew her best struggled with the same question everyone else did. What could have happened in a space so public, so exposed, so ordinary? As the weeks passed, media interest shifted subtly. The headlines softened. Updates became less frequent. Other stories demanded attention. But the footage remained. People continued to watch it late at night, alone with their thoughts. The bus passing, the crosswalk empty. The gap where certainty should be. What lingered was not fear, but discomfort. A sense that the world was not as solid as it appeared. Because Lena's disappearance didn't rely on darkness or isolation, it relied on timing, on motion, on the brief moment when vision was blocked, not by shadow, but by something familiar and mundane. A bus doing its job. At some point, someone noticed something else, something small. In the footage just before the bus enters the frame, Lena glances up. Not sharply, not urgently, just a brief shift of attention, as though something had entered her awareness. That moment sparked renewed debate. Was she reacting to someone calling her name? Noticing something unusual, or simply looking ahead? The camera could not answer. It never would. As the city moved forward, Maple Avenue remained unchanged. People crossed it every day without knowing exactly where Lena had vanished, without realizing they were stepping through a space that refused to explain itself. And slowly, a quieter question replaced the louder ones. Not what happened to her, but how many times has something like this happened before? Without anyone noticing. Because Lena's story was not loud. It did not announce itself with chaos. It slipped quietly between moments, hidden inside routine, wrapped in daylight, and that was what made it impossible to forget. As the weeks stretched into months, the city learned how to carry Lena Morrison's absence without stopping. Her name was spoken less often, but it did not disappear. It lingered quietly, surfacing in conversations that lowered their voices without realizing why. People who crossed Maple Avenue began to slow down without meaning to, glancing around as if the street itself might remember something they did not. The investigation never officially closed. It simply grew quieter. There were no dramatic announcements, no sudden revelations that shifted the story in a new direction. Instead, there was paperwork, follow-ups, rechecked footage, and careful statements that said very little while meaning everything. Authorities acknowledged what everyone already knew, that there was no clear explanation, no confirmed sequence of events that could be shared with certainty. The cameras had done their job. They recorded faithfully. They just hadn't captured understanding. Experts reviewed the footage again, this time not searching for what happened, but for what could have been missed. They spoke about blind spots, about timing, about the way movement and obstruction can create moments of invisibility even in crowded spaces. They explained how the human brain fills gaps automatically, assuming continuity where none is guaranteed. That explanation comforted some people, it unsettled others, because it suggested that the world was full of small openings, brief, ordinary moments where things could change completely without leaving a mark. Lena's family continued to live in that uncertainty. They learned to exist between hope and acceptance, never fully committing to either. Her room remained as she left it. Her belongings became heavier with meaning as time passed. Ordinary objects turned into reminders that refused to fade. They watched the footage too, not endlessly, but enough. Enough to memorize her posture, the way she stood, the slight tilt of her head just before the bus entered the frame. That final visible moment became something like a memory shared between people who had never met her and those who loved her deeply. Everyone saw something different in it. Some saw vulnerability, others saw nothing at all. And perhaps that was the most unsettling part. That meaning could be projected so easily onto silence. Occasionally, new theories surfaced. Someone would claim to have noticed a pattern in the footage. Another person would suggest a scenario that fit neatly within those 8 missing seconds. Each idea sparked brief attention before dissolving under scrutiny. None of them answered the central question. How does someone vanish without disruption? Not taken from a hidden place, not lost in darkness, not removed from the margins of society, but from the center of a normal morning. The case became a reference point for discussions about safety, awareness, and the limitations of surveillance. It was used not as a warning of danger, but as a reminder of complexity. That seeing is not the same as understanding. That recording is not the same as knowing. And that absence can exist even where presence feels guaranteed. Years later, Maple Avenue still looked the same. The crosswalk lines were repainted, traffic lights were upgraded. New cameras replaced old ones, sharper and more advanced than before. People trusted them instinctively, believing clarity had improved, believing the world was more visible now. Yet those who knew the story understood something had already been proven. That clarity does not prevent mystery. That technology does not promise resolution. That sometimes the most important moments occur between frames. Lena Morrison never reappeared on camera. No confirmed sightings, no definitive answers, no conclusion neat enough to put the story to rest. Her disappearance remained what it had always been, a quiet fracture in an ordinary day. And maybe that is why it stayed with people, because it didn't rely on fear, it relied on familiarity. A bus passing by, a light changing, a step forward that should have led somewhere. Instead, it led into silence. We often imagine mysteries as loud events, sudden, dramatic, unmistakable. But Lena's story suggests something else entirely. That mystery can be subtle, that it can hide inside routine, that it can exist without announcing itself at all. It reminds us to pay attention, not with suspicion, but with presence. To notice the people around us, not because we expect something to happen, but because moments matter precisely when they seem ordinary. Because sometimes the last thing anyone sees is not a warning. It is a person moving through their day, unaware that the world is about to lose sight of them. And sometimes, even when the cameras are watching, the truth still slips quietly out of view,